factored form, you have two options for graphing. You could either complete the square and find the vertex and use that for graphing, or you could factor it and use the x-intercepts to find the axis of symmetry, and then using the axis of symmetry to find the vertex. So for the first one, I'm going to do both ways. For the second one, I'll just try to factor it. But for the first one, and we can make sort of a decision which one we like better for graphing. And I'll start with the new way because that's what we're learning today. So I will write method one, factored form. I'll draw a line here, and we'll do method two. Vertex. And we'll see which one we like better. And they're good reviews of both methods anyways. So if I'm going to use the factored form, first I'm going to take a -2 out of everything, which leaves me with x squared minus 5x plus 7. Does it factor? Okay, we can't even use factored form. Right, because I take out the -2 and can't be factored. Number one thing about the factored form that people don't like, it doesn't always work. So then, if I can't factor it, I'm going to go to the vertex form. I'm going to still take out the -2, but remember in the vertex form, in the factored form, you take the -2 out of everything. To change with completing the square, we leave a space. We would only take the -2 out of the first two. Half of 5 is -5 over 2. What would go in the first green space? A plus 25 over 4. What have we actually done? We've actually subtracted 25 over 2. Because that 25 over 4 would get hit by a -2. So to compensate, the opposite of subtracting 25 over 2 would be to add 25 over 2. -14 is -28 over 2 plus 25 over 2. This will be minus 3 over 2. So our vertex is at 5 over 2, comma, -3 over 2. And when we go to graph this, five over 2, comma, -3 over 2. So where would 5 over 2 be? 1, 2, 3. 2.5 to the right. 1, 2. Label that point. I know my parabola is going down. And we always have to label our vertex and one other point. In this case, I find my second point that would be really easy to label. Would be down here. Can you see that if you plug in 0 into the original equation, it's really easy to get -14? In this example, to me, that's the easiest way to find a second point. You could also use go over 1 down 2. Because the a value is a -2, go over 1 down 2. You could find the second point that way. But you see that that's a little bit awkward in this one because of the fractions. but it's doable as well. So when we graph a parabola, we'll always have to show where the vertex is and one other point. Okay, let's see. I did one with vertex form. Let's see if we can do factored form for the second one. If I was factoring 4x squared plus 12x plus 5, I would actually start by putting 5 and 1 here. Because my last number is a 5, you see there's only one option to multiply to get 5. The reason I didn't start with a 4, because then I'd have to decide, should I go with 2 and 2 or 4 and 1? And there's nothing to really help you pick which one you should do. But if I start with the 5 and the 1, can you see that 4 and 1 will never make the outside and inside 12, but 2 and 2 would? My inside's now 10, my outside is 2. And if I need a 12, a positive 12, they both need to be positive. And sure enough, looking at that and multiplying it out, it works. So then I can find my x-intercepts by making it equal to 0. So x-intercepts. And use the zero product property. Here x would be negative 5 over 2. Here x would be negative 1 over 2. So when I go to graph that, I would have negative 1 over 2 comma 0 and negative 5 over 2 comma 0. And right in between those two is my axis of symmetry at x equals negative 3 over 2. Once I have that negative 3 over 2, I could plug that into my calculator. So my equation was 4x squared plus 12x plus 5. So I plug in the negative 1.5. And it actually comes out to a really nice number. Pause. Negative 4, which makes sense. This one should be opening up, right? I mean, technically, y-intercept is usually really easy to find, so I can label that point as well. Because when x is 0, look at the original equation, you plug in 0 for x, you're going to get 5. Question?
Just feels like completing the square is like low-key a lot easier.
Yeah, I like the completing the square a lot easier too. Especially when, like, plugging it in, you almost need a calculator here. The other way, often you don't need a calculator. Completing the square always works. But sometimes the factoring is really easy, so it might be helpful. Okay? Please don't laugh, because this has happened to me 2 classes in a row. But circle the following questions. And
Just say it?
6
Which
and
question?
7.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Cross the 25 over 2. Why
Yeah.
is it positive and not negative?
Because of this negative right here.
Yeah, but
When I put this first green space right here, plus 25 over 4 gets multiplied by the negative, makes negative 50 over 2 or negative 25 over 2. And I have to compensate with the opposite in the other space. At this point, I'm going to get you to turn to an empty page. Let's see. Is there... I'm going to see if I can find a nice empty space for you.
checkpoint 2 spot.
Or maybe on page maybe on page 301 or on page 300. On page 300 or page 301. And if you have different colors, I'd actually suggest the different colors. We have three main forms of the equation of the line. They are the factored form in black, the general form in blue, and the standard form in green. Those are the three main circles.
What page is it?
I'd say do this on page 300 or page 301. Because there's like, on page 300 under that study note. Okay? Now the general form is basically useless. Sorry, general form. But off of the general form, I only have two arrows going off it. Like, you can plug in x equals 0 and find the y-intercept. Your general form is really good for finding the y-intercept. You also know the a value from the general form. And the general form a value will tell you whether it opens up or down, whether it is narrower or wider than the original x squared graph. That is the only thing the general form helps us with. If we want a graph, we need either the factored form or the standard form. Question?
That says plug in x, right? Not plug in x.
Yeah, plug in x equals 0, and that finds your y-intercept. So the general form can always go to the standard form. But notice I put a little arrow here to the factored form, and I wrote sometimes. Because our first example we tried, we couldn't factor it. It doesn't always go to the factored form. So what Riley was saying, I like the standard form better. Yes, because you can always go to the standard form. Now, once you have the standard form, you could still find your y-intercept if you plugged in x equals 0. You could use the vertex, the y-coordinate, to say the range. You get the vertex really easily from standard form. And if you have the vertex, you know the axis of symmetry. If you have the factored form, you can still plug in x equals 0 and get your y-intercept from your factored form as well. The factored form gets you your x-intercepts. That's the one thing that standard form, notice, doesn't get to. Your standard form, the only thing you can't figure out from your standard form is you can't figure out your x-intercepts. From your x-intercepts, you can find the average to find your x axis of symmetry. And from your axis of symmetry, if you plug in the x-coordinate, you could get to your vertex. Yes?
Could you not finding your x-intercept just by plugging in 0 as y and then solving it?
How do you solve it then?
You have to have a point, I guess.
Yeah, you could, I guess technically you could plug in 0 for y, and then you could solve by square rooting.
Yeah.
But usually what happens when you plug in 0 for y, people multiply this out and still factor. So they end up going to the factored form anyways. And notice I put the domain off on its own. The domain is always everything. Doesn't matter what form you have. You have a parabola, they say, what's the domain? It's everything. It's like, can we have a whole test where you just ask us the domain of 85 different parabolas? And that answer, XER, right? First 5 questions are multiple choice. Okay. Then after that, they're short answer. Then after that, long answer, show all your work. And it's XER for everything. But this whole diagram is a nice visual to sort of look at to say, okay, if I get the general form and someone says, find the x-intercepts, I should probably go the factored form direction. If I get the general form and then someone says, what's the vertex? I think I should go the standard form method. And I guess technically, you can always, I'm gonna add an arrow, go back this way, and a black arrow, you can go back this way. You can always expand either the factored side or the standard form to get back to the general form.